Hello. In this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to document your artwork at home. So even if you have access to the lighting lab at school or other lighting labs, it's still a great practice to know how to use what you have at home so that you can be regular with documenting your 2D and 3D artwork. In this section of the demonstration, I'm going to show you how to do 2D artwork with both natural lighting and artificial lighting. So, to get started, I want to tell you a couple of things that you will need material wise. Um, First, you need obviously to hang your art. You either need some thumbtacks or some painter's tape. You can also use nails, however it is that you want to get your work into the wall. I suggest binder clips. These are really big ones, but you can also use the tiny ones so that you don't have to pierce your the paper. You also need some sort of camera, right? Now, if you are planning to document or to use the documentation of your work to reprint, you will want to use a higher resolution camera. So if you don't have one, you want to borrow a friend's, you want to use something that has at least 10 or 15 megapixels for resolution. For the sake of just documenting the work for your assignments to turn in digitally or to add the images to your Weebly portfolio or whatever portfolio you're working on, your cell phone is pretty good. That'll do just fine, and that's how I'm going to show you today how to be shooting your work. So some sort of thumbtack or tape to get your art on the wall, and then also obviously a camera. Now, if you're using your cell phone camera, I do recommend these little adapters. These are cell phone adapters for a tripod, which is also a material that you don't have to have, but is very useful. And any tripod will do. No, any tripod's better than no tripod. And obviously, tripods just stabilize the image so that you're able to sort of work around it and also create uniformity between your images. And they sell these little cell phone adapters very, very cheaply. I think it's only a couple of dollars on Amazon. And then it just screws right into your tripod. And this little hinge here makes it, let me try and grab my phone. It makes it universal for most cell phone sizes. So you see that it just hinges right on there. And this thing right here is super helpful for tons of reasons, but especially in this one. You will also need some sort of surface. I'm going to show you how to hang white paper, but if you have a wall color that is not white, you want to get you some craft paper. Now this is just a big roll of 30, it's a 36-inch roll, but just whatever it is that you can cover your surface with so that you have a nice clean background to hang your work. That's all you really have to have, but there are a few things that I recommend that you also have. Now, if you're in one of my classes that has the DIY photo kit, if you got that with your course fees, what that includes, and what I recommend to those of you that aren't in those classes, is 2 clamp lights. Now, these are just affordable, found at Home Depot. I think they're less than $10 each. And they're really for contractors for painting and just real quick light access. And what makes them great is that they have these little clamps that can go on all kinds of things and surfaces. So you need 2 of those. And then it is important when you're using artificial lighting, and we'll talk about that, is that your bulbs are the same temperature. And that just really means that they are the same color. So, some lights are a little bit warmer or cooler than others. For the purpose of this demonstration, and what I personally recommend would be to use daylight balance bulbs. So, those are going to be a little bit cooler than like your traditional tungsten lamps, that warm glow. The daylight bulb is just a little bit more accurate, obviously, to what we know of the sun daylight color. But also, it just is really easy to white balance later in Photoshop or Lightroom, whatever it is that you're using. I also recommend having, so that is what came in your kit if you got a kit from me. It's the 2 lamps, 2 of the daylight bulbs, and then that roll of craft paper so that you can sort of have a backdrop to things. Now, I also recommend that you find some sort of tape. We're going to be doing a lot of just rigging stuff up on the walls of windows. This is gaffer tape. This is photographer and film industry tape, but you can also use painter's tape and just edit that out later. I also recommend having a sketchbook. This will be really great for reflecting light, and I'll explain that more later. And then this is a secret. This is just a plain old vinyl shower curtain liner. You probably have one in your shower right now. This is a really great material for diffusing light in large scale. So I'm going to show you how to put this on your window to diffuse light. But a smaller version of that, and something that often works, especially if you're documenting something small, is wax paper. Just cooking wax paper. You notice that it has a similar fog effect of the shower curtain liner. I should mention that that liner is fogged, it's not clear. And what happens is when you push light through this, it diffuses it, it scatters it everywhere, and it makes it a little bit more even. Scissors would be a great thing to have on hand. And that is about it for materials. Okay, so first things first in documenting your work is setting up your artwork, right? So something to keep in mind when you are setting things up is to think about where you physically need to be in relation to the work. As you can see behind me, I have hung the craft paper on the wall, and I'm going to put my 2D work right about here. Now, if it's larger, we'll talk about that later. And if it's smaller, we'll talk about that later too. But just think about where your eye level is, so it's easier for you to just stand at your normal height without having to bend over or reach higher. And also you're going to put your tripod at that same level so that it is easy for you. Right now, my camera is mounted right where my eyes are so that, again, I'm not having to move around funny. So I sort of expect you to set your backdrop up behind you, maybe in your bedroom, in your dorm room, and just kind of leave it there because you should be documenting your work throughout the semester. And you'll probably, have a few pieces set aside, and at the end of every week, you just go ahead and you throw them on the wall there and document it. So try and find a place in your room that's easy for you to crouch down or not crouch down, and also is just going to be on a desirable part of the wall. Now, this craft paper, I've hung and tried to keep it as smooth as possible. So I've taped it at the corners so that no curls come down and create any shadows. You want to be careful when you're rolling it out and cutting it off of the roll that you don't have it bend or pop. So make sure that the floor or table's clean. And then be careful when you're hanging it because any little bends in it, you'll have to edit out later. So it's not the end of the world, but you might as well save yourself a little bit of time by getting this as smooth as possible. And again, at eye level if you're doing it on the wall. We're going to talk about tabletop in a minute. And also for the 3D documentation, you'll be working on tabletop. So again, the object is going to be of easy access to you and your camera. Now, if the work is behind glass, if this is a frame piece, you want to remove that glass. And I have a clip right here to insert to show you why that is. So I wanted to show you that if you shoot a picture that is behind glass or in a frame, while you might not see it on your phone, when you get up closer to that picture when you've pulled it up on a monitor, you'll start to see that there's a reflection. And it might be the most subtle thing, but you're probably going to be in it if you could see that I'm waving back there. So you always want to pull that out from behind glass if possible. Okay, so another thing to keep in mind is the wall that you're hanging it on. Now I know some of you only have certain corners in your dorm room or your bedroom at home. And so I know that it's not going to always be possible to use the optimal wall in your room. But I have another clip right here to show you why it is you shouldn't put the your art documentation setup right across the wall from a window. So that's here. So another common problem is having your work all set up and then not realizing it until you're shooting, or maybe even after in post, that if you put the work on the wall that is completely opposite of a window, so here's the art, here's my setup, and then that window is right there, bringing light straight in. And what happens is that because now the camera, or in this case you, are obstructing the light between the window and your art, and you'll have some funny looking shadows in there that even with reflectors and things like that are going to be difficult to get rid of. So ideally you would want to put your art on an opposite wall so that the light is coming in indirectly and that you're able to control that shadow a little bit more. So in this setup, here's my documentation, and the windows are going to be over here. And you can notice that the light is able to come in from this side at this angle, and it's not direct light, it's about mid-afternoon light that is coming down and then hitting across. But what's not happening is that my camera, or me behind my camera, is obstructing that light from hitting the subject that I am documenting. So I've put it at an indirect wall, and ideally this is what you want to do, but if you can't, there are some ways that we can bring light in to take care of those shadows, but you want to try and find an indirect wall. So one up there, one over here. Now with that off of the wall, I'm going to just go ahead and put my thumbtacks in. And then I'm going to use binder clips. These are really massive clips. I think you all know the little tiny ones you use for documentation. I definitely recommend those. I just don't happen to have any today. But now I'm going to hang that work with those clips so that it's not piercing. And then these will be photoshopped out later. So I'm going to try and do my best to get it straight. You can see that it's a little wonky. And the good thing about the clips is they allow you to kind of drop down lower without having to keep putting holes in your wall. You can also use painter's tape if you trust that it won't take off the surface of your work, or you can roll it into a little bubble, and put it on the back as well. So I am using a cell phone camera for this. This is obviously an iPhone. I'm just using the local camera app on the phone. You're welcome to use the more professional manual control ones. In fact, I encourage you to try and figure out your shutter and aperture and things like that. But for the sake of this demo, I'm going to just use the straight phone app on there, and it's great. It does a lot of things that you might not know that it can. So I'm just going to put it in there. And then I want to bring my phone, my camera, as close to that piece as possible. And I want to get it centered in the frame. But once it's good and in the frame, you want to get as close as you can while still leaving negative space. And the reason for that is that these camera phones have a very wide angle lens, and there tends to be distortion if you start to bring your image, your artwork image, into this very fine border. So this is the sweet spot of the camera lens. That's where it's not going to look as distorted. And then you also want to include some white paper in the image so that later you can white balance, and we'll talk about that then. So I've got my work framed up pretty nice, and what I want to do now on the phone app is just click, and when you click there, if you click and hold, that's going to allow you to lock your focus. So it's going to lock focus. And then also the little sunshine icon comes up. And what that does is it allows you to make it brighter or darker. So while the sunshine icon is up, you want to slide up. It's going to make it really bright. You can see there it's overexposed. And down is going to underexpose it. And what you're looking for here is not to go over. That's more dangerous than going under anytime you shoot. You'd rather underexpose than overexpose. But you're looking for the finest detail in the image, and in this case, you could tell that that top ottoman of Miles's print is the lightest. So we still need to be able to see detail there, but we want our whites around the border to be pretty bright. But we don't want to worry too much about that. What's most important now is that the detail in the finest uh, parts of the image are looking good. And then once that's looking good, go ahead and take a couple. I always recommend to take a few just because, especially if you're holding your hand, this camera in your hand, you tend to shake a little bit. If you are shooting handheld, let me move this out of the way a second. So here, I want to shoot a couple vertical, right? Because that is mostly how the image is set up. I want to take a few because I'm probably moving and shaking here. I need to reset my focus by clicking and holding down. But a good thing to keep in mind if you are hand holding any image, this is like true for documentation or otherwise, is if you're hand holding an image, you have a lot more stability if you hold your arms out completely like this and kind of lock your elbows. And then you want to take a breath and hold it in, and that's when you shoot. You don't want to, or that's when you hit the shutter. You don't want to hit the shutter while you're breathing out, because as you breathe out, your body will just naturally move. So if you have to do handheld, lock your elbows, breathe in, take the picture. Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit and now talk about the lighting itself. Right now, we are using natural lighting. So when I say natural lighting, I just mean available lighting made from the sun outside. There are no lamps on in the room right now, and that's important. If you are shooting with natural available window light or outside, you want to make sure that there aren't any lamps that are on in the area, because that'll change the color, the temperature of different light, and you'll have some strange casts. And then when you do use artificial lighting, you want to make sure you're only using the same color bulbs, which we'll talk about that later. So natural lighting is going to be the most ideal lighting for just about anything. And just know that all of the principles we're talking about in today's demo for documenting your work, it also applies to portraits. So the most flattering natural light, and this is true especially for portraits, but also to art, is actually overcast, cloudy skies. And the reason why that is because clouds act as just a huge, huge softbox. And if you know anything about studio lighting, I'm sure you've seen it, even if you've never been in a studio. A softbox is just a light with a huge, huge cloud, fabric cloud put on top of it. And again, like I explained with that wax paper or the vinyl shower curtain, all that's doing is diffusing the light. So it's taking strong beams of light and it's scattering it so that the light becomes even across a lot of surfaces. So actually, while I'm talking right now, the light just went from overcast to just sunshiny. So I guess the sun came out from behind a cloud. And you'll notice now the sun is indirect. So it's outside coming in from this angle. And I'm making a big deal about this because you need to be looking at the surface of your art and you're trying to avoid shadows. You want the cleanest, most even light across. Now the sun has gone behind the cloud again. And so this is what would be considered overcast, diffuse light. And you'll notice that the shadows are a little bit softer. And by soft, I mean they're not as dark. There's not as high a contrast between shadows. And also the light is not as intense across the surface. It's just sort of like a suggestion of light nearby. This is the most ideal for artwork because this is how you'll see the detail and fine craftsmanship that you've spent all your time putting into it. Now, the midday sun, which is right now, is a good option for shooting outside too. Some lighting though from the sun that you want to avoid would be late afternoon and early morning. Now, those are great for portraits. So that is different because it creates a really nice mood. You've heard of the golden hour, which is right before sunsets, and the sun is very low on the horizon and warm, and it comes horizontally towards your subject. So that has its own dramatic function. But for documenting work, you're not looking for to create a mood outside of the piece, right? You're just looking for um, clean and even detail. The artwork should shine, not the photograph of the artwork. And you want to avoid shadows when you're documenting your work. Now, I will say that there is plenty of times when, especially with sculpture, when shadows are really helpful for showing how the form is made. But for 2D work, we're only looking for diffused, even, clean lighting. This right here is a piece of foam core that I have just simply lined with aluminum foil from the kitchen. I put a couple of layers on there. You don't have to worry about being fancy. And then on the back side of that foam core, this is just a white surface. Now, if you've been in a photo studio before, you've seen them use reflectors. And reflectors are exactly that. They're going to bounce light off from one source and direct it towards another. So I wanted just to show you what the do-it-yourself version of one of those fancy reflectors are. The white surface is really great for illuminating shadows, and then the foiled surface is really great for portraiture when you want to highlight edges of shadows. You want to create a little bit more of a contrast. So I'm going to show you how to use those in relation to your work, but this is my do-it-yourself reflector. Okay, so I have put my work directly here under the window. I've laid out some clean white paper. I'm going to try and get my surface as clean as possible. And what's really nice here is I will be shooting directly down. But you can see that when I shoot that picture, there's a great deal of shadow that's come in from the right-hand side. And because I'm exposing for the finest of details in that drawing, it looks pretty dark, and we can brighten that up later, but we can start to see how uneven that light truly is. Right now, the light outside is overcast, but it doesn't mean that there's not going to be more light coming in from this side than the other. So while shooting, there's a couple of things you can do to make that more even. One of the most simple things is actually just to use a hardbound sketchbook and open it up to a page that is blank on both sides. This becomes a white reflector like the one I just showed you. And one of the things you can do is just prop that up across from your light source, and that is going to reflect that light from the white down onto the work. So let's try and reshoot that now. And it looks a little bit better. But there's still a good bit of darkness on that top right and bottom left corners. So what I could go on to do would be to bring in my big reflector card and just start to add in white reflective surfaces with paper or whatever it else is that you need to do so that when you're shooting down, that light is scattering all through there. Let's take a picture now and see how that looks. Again, I'm going to take a few just in case I'm moving and it's a little bit soft. I'll have some options later. And now we're starting to get rid of those shadows because later on we'll be cropping out all of that stuff on the edge. But for now, I feel like that's a pretty good version of getting those shadows a little bit smoothed out. Now, another option you have from your reflective surfaces is making your light that is coming in a little bit harsh and diffusing it. So right here, I've just torn some wax paper off of my roll for my kitchen. And I would want to hold that between my light source and the object. And if you can see as I bring that down, that's basically taking a sunny daylight and making it overcast. Now, if your object you're working on is much larger than that, and this is especially true for portraiture, a very large source of diffusion is that vinyl shower curtain liner that I just showed you in the materials. What I could do now is tape this up to my window. Okay, so I have hung up my shower curtain on this window right here, and I just taped it up so I could take it down real easily after. And you'll notice now that that light is quite smooth across the surface. I'm holding my focus. I can make it a little bit brighter with that sun, but not too bright. Take a few pictures and then swap it out for a new piece of work. If you have a really large piece of work and you're not able to get the light even inside, or even if you just don't have a wall that's big enough, you might consider taking it outside. This is mid-afternoon sun, and you can see there's a pretty even light across the surface there. Overcast day would be even better for this. And if it's super, super big, you might think about putting it on the ground and then shooting from a second story balcony, or if you're in a building from just another landing, and just shooting so that you can get that nice even square without distortion. So think about for large works, taking them outside. We ideally want to shoot with natural light, but that's not always available to us, right? So we're going to be constructing our own natural lighting look. Um, the key to lighting, and this is true for studio lighting, this is true for DIY lighting, this is true for anything, is that there's no real science to it. All you're doing when you are looking at lighting is just visualizing what looks good. You are thinking, you are moving and tweaking your light sources and adding diffusers or reflectors or all different kinds of tools to make it just simply look good. So don't be intimidated by what it ought to look like or what it's supposed to look like. Make it look like what you want it to look like. For again, 2D work, we want it to be pretty even. And your challenge with artificial lighting is getting it even, because the surfaces, or I'm sorry, the sources are different sizes and shapes. So you can see here that I am using the clamp lights. I'm going to take my camera off a second. And you can see here that I'm having to get creative. I have my two clamp lights right here, but you can see that I've had to figure out how to rig them up with just what I have at home. And in this case, it's a ladder with a broom on it so that I could get some more height. And you can see that I've just simply clamped that to the height that I'll tell you about in just a moment. And then here I'm using a coat stand. I'm finding, again, what makes the most sense. Now, if you don't have furniture that you can use to rig up this tall, this might be a good reason to then bring your artwork down on the wall or on a surface, a tabletop, so that you could use shorter furniture like chairs and things and bring that down to the level of the artwork. So again, I've hung my artwork and brought my camera as close as I can um, without bringing it to the edge so that I'm avoiding distortion. Now, if you are shooting in another camera or a camera app that allows you to adjust the white balance, you want to set it to auto or daylight. These are daylight bulbs, which means they have a pretty cool neutral tone to them. And if you have it set to tungsten or shade or other things like that, you're going to get some weird color cast. That could be edited later. We're going to white balance with that white paper. But if you do have the option to set it, you could set it to daylight or auto, and you want to do that now. Okay, so when setting up two lamps in the way that that kit that I got you is, you want to take your artwork, you have your camera directly in front of it, and then you want to set your cameras at 45-degree angles on opposite sides of the work. What 45-degree angles does, I'll show you by turning off one of the lights. See, if I only have one light source, I only have that light coming in from the side, and I get that shadow on the right-hand side. I'm going to take better advantage of my light by bringing it a little bit closer so it's brighter. It's at the same height as my artwork. It's very important. And then on these, you can adjust, reclamp. You just want to make sure it's the same height as your artwork. But the problem there you see is that shadow off to the right. So when I add another light on the opposite side at the same exact height, it neutralizes those shadows. It cancels them out. So whatever shadow would be coming from this light source is canceled by that light, and whatever shadow would come from this light source is canceled from this light. If it's still feeling a little dark in your camera, you could just bring those lights closer, but you want to make sure that you're always doing the same adjustment on both sides. Okay, so this is the setup for a piece that I'm again using the two lamps at 45 degrees. So here I've got my focus nice and locked in by clicking and holding, but I'm seeing some what we call hot spots, which is these two bright white lights. And all those are, as you can imagine, are directly reflecting in the glossy reflective surface of these two lights. So we want to maintain that same strength of lighting, but we want to diffuse its harshness. So this is sort of the same thing if we were shooting in bright sun. The contrast would be really high. We would want to instead shoot in a cloudy day so that the light is diffused. So one of the ways we could do that is with wax paper. And what you could do if you watch closely on those hot spots, if you just bring that wax paper between your light and that work, that helps soften that both the shadows around the work and also the hot spots. Now that also is dimming the light just slightly, so you might need to go in here now and brighten it up a little bit just to compensate for what you're diffusing out. And you want to make sure if you're ever holding anything like this to obstruct the light, that you don't affix it to the surface of the lamps because they will get hot. So you want to be very careful. It helps to have a buddy that can just hold that diffuser in between the work and the light. You want to make sure that they are careful not to bring that shadow into the frame. So you want to hold it just at the right angle there. If that doesn't work, if you're still getting a glare, you might consider changing the angle of your camera. Now this will distort the shape. Let me change my focus real quick. This will distort the shape on screen. Now it's not going to be a perfect square, but you're able to find a blind spot of that light in your camera. You can also adjust your lights now. So this would be a situation where your 45 degrees, you're just going to have to fib a little bit and play with it until that glare goes away. And here, if you have to adjust those lights and you start to see shadows, this would be a good time to bring in some reflectors to bring that light back down. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong side. That's the foil side. But to bring some white light in above top, and then you could start to work on the shadows themselves. Something to keep in mind with this lighting setup here is that the bigger the piece that you have on the wall, the further back those lights need to come away from the wall so that they have more distribution across the surface. But because of that, the further you get away, the more underexposed the image will be in your camera. So you want to make sure that as you pull those lights back, that you're brightening up that exposure a little bit in your camera. You could do that later in post editing. Um, Another option is that if you're using really big artwork, you can get stronger bulbs for these, but you just don't want to go over 100 watts. That's the maximum capacity for these lamps. And it might even have a label inside the lamp that says that the capacity is smaller than that. So just be careful, but know that you're going to have to get more powerful light with the bigger work that you use. And to always have a buddy with you if you are doing any sort of diffusion or you need another set of hands. You don't want to fix diffusers or reflectors to the light sources ever. Okay, so let's talk about photographing 3D work. This is the same principle, except we're going to change the way that we think about light a little bit, because with 3D work, you're really wanting to show the form. And in that case, shadows are your friend. So while we've been working to make the 2D work very flat and avoid shadows, we're sort of looking for shadows in 3D work so that we could see texture, we could see shape, we could see dimension to the work. And for dimension, you need shadows. Now, in this demonstration, I'm going to show you the tabletop method, and I highly recommend using a tabletop um, if your object can fit on the table, because as you can see right now, I'm sitting down, and that allows me to adjust the object, shoot at a comfortable height rather than crouching or trying to lift up. And also, I'm going to show you how to use lights for it in the artificial lighting part. And to set up lights, you can use furniture that is here, like at waist level. If your object is very big, you can take it and put it on the floor, but that creates another set of problems with shooting, crouching, and also lights. It's hard to direct lights downward without getting some kind of funky shadows. And also, lighting just gets more and more difficult the bigger the object is. So if your piece is big, you might consider taking it into the lighting studio at school. If you are shooting in the sculpture or wood shop or something like that, you're just wanting to look for a neutral wall space and floor. Um, and good luck with that. It's a little bit more difficult. Natural light is definitely your friend with larger pieces. Think about taking it outside again and just trying to get the most neutral background as possible. So to start, we're going to talk about natural lighting tabletop. So you can see here that I have taken the craft paper roll and I've just affixed that to a wall, and I have brought it down and I've given it enough slack that right here there's not a crease in the bend. We don't want to see a horizon line here. We want the object, when we place it here, to appear as though it's floating. We don't want it to think of it as living or existing in a space. We want it to think of it as just um, a floating object. So to do that, you give yourself this little curve, and that paper roll is really great for doing that. Now you could cut off your paper here and tape it to the table, or you can use the weight of the roll itself to hold it in place. And in that case, when you're finished, as long as you haven't marked up your paper, you can just roll it back up and use it for something else. So this is the setup on the table. Now, this is set up with the window light coming in from the side. And that is important because, again, we are looking for shadows and dimension. So the light is going to come in across here. And here's a picture to show you the exact setup. And we are going to place the object, obviously, right there in the middle. If you can't get closer with your camera because of your table, bring that object just further to the edge. I'm going to hold my lock down. You can see now that that focus is locked. And I could go up or down on that exposure, but I want to make sure that my finest detail is exposed for. So if anything, I'm going to underexpose it here. Take a couple of those shots. And that looks pretty good, but I think you'll see that this surface of this object is quite shiny, and so it's reflecting that window light in there. Now, if you want to show the texture, especially in ceramics and metals and things where the glazing or the enamel is important, that might work in your favor, but you don't want, you can see here, we're starting to see the reflection of the camera. So just like in the 2D work, we could start to diffuse that light a little bit. So we use wax paper in 2D in the 2D demo. I also wanted to show you that you can use just gift wrapping tissue paper. That works just as well. It's a little bit thicker, but you'll notice those white reflections start to make you look at the other darker reflections in that surface. And when I hold up the tissue paper between the light source, in this case the window, and the object, that starts to fall away a little bit. I'm going to take a couple while I can. And here, instead of using 2 lamps, I'm only going to use 1. And you can see here that now, if I use 2, I wouldn't be able to work with the shadows in my favor. So this acts more like a single light source like the sun. And there we can get and see some more dimension to the work. So I just have 1 light right here at 45 degrees. But notice on the camera screen how it can change. That shadow moves, obviously, as I move that lamp around. And for this case, it's going to be different conventions for different media. In fact, ceramics, they tend to use a gradation background so that this is darker in the back and then fades to white up front. Jewelry and metals, I know, like to use a very bright white background. So this is just a little bit about personal taste and then also the media you're using. But you just want to play with your light here. Like you can see the shadow that's coming in from the right hand side. We just accidentally exposed for it. I could just direct my light and either fill that area. Also keep an eye on the light. In this case, I am directing my light to the ceiling. And when I do that, you can see that the light is bouncing off of the white ceiling and then flooding back down and brightening up this area a lot. And that's a really good trick for jewelry and metals. Now, if that shadow is a little bit too extreme, you can use your reflector. Remember, we use this for 2D. I'm going to turn it on the white side. You can also just use a piece of white poster board or paper. And just like before, I can bring that white poster in, make sure it stays out of the frame of your camera, and then just try and bounce that light back onto the object, and then that'll help fill in some of that shadow. In fact, you might use a smaller piece of paper when you're working on the tabletop, just so that you can have a little bit more versatility. So here's just some white paper. And if I come in and try and bounce that light back, it's going to fill that shadow here on this picture. Now, something else that might be concerning is your glares. So this object has a shiny surface, and just like with the natural light example, we might want to get rid of these little hot spots. So again, I can use wax paper or tissue paper or a shower curtain liner, something that is going to diffuse the light. And just make sure that you're holding that instead of obstructing it in between your source of light and the object itself. Now, this is 2 layers of tissue paper. The more that you use, the light is going to dim, but it will also diffuse more as well too. Just make sure it's not in the frame, and then have a buddy to hold that up while you do that. So with whatever lighting setup you're using for 3D, in this case I'm bouncing it on the ceiling so that that light is coming back down and flooding right here. You just want to make sure that you also go ahead and grab some detail shots while you're shooting. Because so much of that craftsmanship is in the texture, and make sure too that you rotate the object so that you get a backside shot, um, a nice scale shot. You want to see the depth of that work. So go ahead and move your camera around that object. Just make sure that if the light is directed more directly towards the object, like here, you want to make sure that you're not obstructing that with your camera and getting a weird shadow. Now, if your object is white or very light colored, a white backdrop might not be the best here, right? Because we want to be able to see the difference of the object and the background. We don't want it to be blown out, and we won't be able to find that edge on a white background. So if you're working in school, we have great medium gray color paper that's just for this, for tabletop shooting or pedestal shooting of your work. At home here, I've just used a yoga mat. It does have a little bit of a texture and shine to it, but as you can see here, it works really good because it is long, and I can still give it that curve in the back so that there is no distinction and the object looks like it's floating. However, here, you want to try and keep the light off of the background. We don't necessarily want to see that texture. We want to see the texture here. So instead, I recommend bringing your light from a hard side and sort of pointing it almost towards the camera, but you still want to be able to see some texture there in the work. And then here, my reflector would come in handy because I would want to bring that light back around to the front of the object. Again, I'm using just this DIY reflector, and I'm now positioning it towards the light just off camera here. And you can see the left side now of that bust is more illuminated. So you want to prop that up, and then, not sure if you can see me and the work here. Obviously a tripod's really handy right now. And then bring that in there. Okay, so now it's time to bring our images into the computer, edit those, and upload them to our portfolio website. So first, I'm going to pull those images off of my camera, and in this case, I shot those with my iPhone, so I logged into iCloud.com, and I find it just easiest to go through, pull up photos, and just select your images. And in this case, I selected multiple images by clicking on the first image in the series and then holding the shift key while I click the last image in the series. And if there's any images that you are included here that you don't want to bring in, like this one, you can see my hand, I can unselect an image by clicking while holding the command key on PC or command on Mac or control on PC. And then when I have the ones that I want to download selected, I'm going to go over here and hit download selected. So this is Adobe Bridge, and this is a program that really just acts as a jumping off point for any of the other Adobe Creative Suite programs. In this case, it's just great for organizing your files, setting up folders, ranking, tagging, and just using it as file management. So with my images now downloaded from iCloud, I want to go ahead and set up a folder organization so that I can always trust and refer back to different folders and just know where to find an image if I've lost one. So here, like I've encouraged you to have for everything that you do here at Winthrop, but also just for your own sake, is to have an external storage drive. Your desktop or your laptop is going to fill up very quickly. So here I have my external hard drive plugged in. I'm going to double click on that. And then this is my existing folder structure on there. But if you don't already have a folder set up for yourself, go ahead and do that. And then however you find it most useful to organize things. If you want to think about it per class, if you want to think about it per date. For instance, here I have a date folder for this year. And then within that folder, I have separate month folders. And I went ahead and numbered those so that when I sort them, they sort in the order that we know of the calendar year. Otherwise, it will be alphabetical and be out of order. If that doesn't make sense for you, if you don't shoot a lot of images and instead you're just using this for classes, you could separate them with the title of the class. You could say all of your photo classes go in their own folder and then further separate. But either way, you want to have a designated folder for your images. And so I'm going to create a new folder now and call it my portfolio for this class. But obviously I'm going to be shooting work for other classes. So however, again, this is just your own preference. Now I just downloaded those images from iCloud. So I need to find those. So up here on the top left is going to be your file path. These are some favorite and shortcut keys. And you're just going to navigate to wherever it is that your computer downloads things. So mine is under my name and then downloads. And then for me, that's going to be in my downloads folder. This is sorted so that the most recent thing is going to be at the top. I'm going to double click there. And then I'm going to select all and hit Command A on my keyboard to do that. You can also do Control A on PC. And all of those images are selected, so I can now drag and drop them on the portfolio. Even as a favorite here, that is still an active link where it knows that I want those images now in that portfolio. Now the problem here though is that all of these raw images, and by raw I just mean unedited for right now, they are just sitting and kind of cluttering up that folder. So another thing that you could do is create some subfolders. I just right-clicked and clicked New Folder. And you could create an unedited images, and then finally final images. And this will make it where when you're clicking through there later, you can, avoid the ones that are unedited and just be looking for final ones after you've done all of your revisions. And so I'm going to move these now into that unedited images folder. So I am clicking that last one and the first one while holding Shift, and then I'm dragging those to unedited. Now, if you were to have downloaded or photographed with a camera, you would need to download your images from your memory card. So I've entered my memory card into the memory card reader. And now I can, from Bridge, say, get photos from camera. That's this little camera icon right here. And a little window is going to come up, and it's going to try and find your memory card. Now, if you don't see your memory card name here, you can try and reinsert that and then refresh the list, and it should pop up. Mine's called Untitled. And this is actually pulling in images you could see from the demo itself. And from here, I can go and find the folder that I would like those to be placed in. So in my case, I could say choose. I'm going to my external hard drive. I have these under my portfolio, and then I would want to, again, include them in my unedited images. From there, you could even create another subfolder if you wanted it to say, from camera or whatever. You could rename your file if you'd like to, and then this is just ask you what to do when you're finished. And so from there, to download from your memory card, you would just say Get Media. Okay, so with these unedited images, I'm going to open those up. And right now we are working in the Essential workspace, which just allows us to see everything at a glance. You can make those icons bigger or smaller down here with this slider. Right now they're out of order because we know I shot the other white background first, so I'm just going to change the order there. But now I want to go through and only bring the images that I think are the best into Photoshop for further editing. So we're in the Essentials workspace, but I'm going to click over here to Film Strip. And that puts all those images on the bottom here and lets you get a pretty good preview of that image above. If you shot in a RAW file format with a camera, this preview here is still going to be pretty quick. The Film Strip is designed to quickly toggle through your images and make your selections. So I know these first few were just me finding my space on the camera. And then here I'm going to decide which of these images I like best. Now the great thing is in Bridge is that you're able to rank images. And I have a star system down here, and I could click on the stars for the images that I like the very best. I could make that a 5-star. Or less than that, I could do a 4-star if I just want to consider it later. However it is that you want to rank those. So I'm just going to go between those and decide which one I like best. You can see the variation in light there. This one has that bright glare from those windows. And that next one I diffused with tissue paper. I like this one better, so I'm going to mark it as a 4. This one is still pretty bright. This is when we went into the artificial lighting, and you can see that that contrast of bright and shadow is quite high. So I don't care for those, but this is where I start to diffuse that shadow. Notice here along the edge of the shadow how much softer it gets when I hit the diffuser. I'm going to click that one. I like it. I went ahead and grabbed a few details while I was in there, so I want to take those into Photoshop. Now with my dark background, you can see that this texture is pretty prominent, especially here when the light is in the front of the mannequin. So when I started to curve that light around and bring it from behind, I prefer these. This one's without diffusion. This one is with, and you can see that that detail in the highlight is a lot easier to read. So this is my favorite of the group. This one's actually a little bit more centered, so I'm gonna unrate this one by clicking this, and that resets the rating. Now that I've got the best ones picked, I'm gonna click back over to Essentials, and what's great here is this button up here lets you filter by rating. So I'm going to say I only want to see the images that are 4 stars or more. And now these are my 4 best. And the great thing now is that I can click from here, double click the image, and it's going to automatically open it in Photoshop. Okay, so this is the image opened in Photoshop. Now if you shot on a RAW file type with a digital camera, you are going to automatically get the Camera Raw workspace. It's going to pop up at this point. If you shot on a phone or a camera that just uses JPEGs, it's going to just default to this workspace. So the first thing you want to do is go up here and click on Filter, and then choose Camera Raw Filter if that workspace is not already prompted when you open that image. Now from here, we've got lots of options. The right-hand side is our menu that we can toggle between the different tools. The first one is going to be your editing tool, and this is where a lot of our work will be. So for the first thing I want to do is white balance my image. And when you have the top editing slider selected, that is your first option. So it's sort of a natural workflow from top to bottom. And use the eyedropper on this white paper. You'll see that it slightly changed it, and it's now reading it as what it thinks to be white. In this drop-down menu beside that, there are some other options, but the white balance with the dropper is going to be your most accurate. And if you think it looks a little too green or too pink, you can adjust these sliders, but be very careful with those. If it's too warm, you can go cooler. If it's too cool, you can go warmer. But this one is a pretty good authentic way of seeing what that white balance is. So start there. I'm going to fit this back to view. And the next thing that we want to do is think about the exposure. So you want the image in the documentation to look like it does in person. We're not trying to create a better or different piece, a more dramatic piece. We want the exposure to look like what our eyes see when we see the artwork with them. So you can use this exposure slider to brighten up a little bit. But remember, when we shot this, we were concerned about the fine detail here in this print. And so because of that, I'm turning my eyedropper off by clicking it. I want to be very careful I don't lose that detail. So I'm going to brighten it up a little bit more. And then I'm going to stop as soon as that detail starts to disappear. In the image here, that was pretty bright because we bounced the light off of the ceiling. If I open that in the raw setting and try and white balance over here, it's going to say that it's too bright because it's not really reading it as white anymore. That's just information that doesn't exist because it's so overexposed. Now, for our sake, for this, we like that it's floating, so that's okay that it's overexposed, but you might have to bring your eyedropper into slightly more textured area so that it can find what is considered to be white. When you're done with your white balance and exposure adjustments, you can hit OK. Then we can talk about removing unwanted objects. So if you have push pins or binders at the top there of the image, you want to remove those. And the easiest way to do that, there's a lot of different spot removal and healing tools that Photoshop offers. But I find this first one, Spot Healing Brush, to be the most straightforward. Now, when I roll over the image, you can see that my cursor has become a brush. I can make that circle bigger or smaller by using the brackets on my keyboard. So the left bracket, which is the key right next to the letter P, that's going to make the brush smaller. You see how it's disappearing? And then the one to the right of that is going to make it bigger. You want your spot removal brush to be about the same size or larger than the thing it is that you are removing. So in this case, we're going to crop this down a good bit, but I want to go ahead and try and get rid of those binders. So I'm just covering the whole area in one swoop. And then Photoshop does its best at trying to understand what it is you're trying to get rid of. It uses something in a similar area that, and it uses the content around it to make up for where you think is a blemish. Now, if you were to zoom in and find some marks on the artwork, this would be a really good time to go ahead, like little fingerprints or smudges. You could get rid of those. If there was a thumbtack here, I could clean that up. In this case, our white paper was pretty crisp, so I'm not too worried about that because we are going to crop in now. So when you are thinking about crops, you want to make the image a dimension or a ratio that is standard. So up here is the crop tool. It's that 5th button down. And the thing up here, this is all your minor adjustments or finer adjustments to any tool that you're using. In this drop-down window first, there are some options for you. And the reason why is because we think of pictures and TVs and other rectangles. We think of those as like having a standard ratio. You know of your TV probably right now as a 16:9 ratio. That's because that's what most films are recorded in. You know of 4:6 photos because that's most often what drugstores use, right? And 5:7s are great for portraits, and 8:10s are big for for headshots. All of these ratios have a lot of science and reason behind why they are more flattering to different things. But the idea here is that you don't want to just crop your image willy-nilly, even if it fits the size of your art. Because the problem is that when you try and upload this later to a website, it's probably not going to fit within their conventional design. Or if you try and print this later, if it's a high enough resolution, if you try and print this later and it's at a strange, awkward ratio, you're probably going to either get a black border or a white border, and it's going to be really hard to find a frame for. So standard sizes are standard for a reason. It's just something that a lot of images can fit towards. And the most common one probably is this 2:3 or 4:6 ratio. If you click on original ratio here, that's going to be whatever your camera shot it in. It's just going to maintain that same proportion between the width and the height. And if it's set for horizontal like this, because my camera, remember, was horizontal, I can change it to vertical by clicking this button right up here, which just swaps height for width. So this would be the phone's standard ratio. I'm not sure what that proportion is exactly. And that fits pretty good on that original image. So now that I've used my white paper for my white balance, I can just crop that straight out and get as tight into the detail of the work and centered as possible. Now, if your work was hung funky on the wall, you could use the crop tool here as your opportunity to adjust that angle and make sure that it's straight. When you start to move the angle, this grid comes up, and you want to use these lines as they are vertical and horizontal, and you want to find another vertical or horizontal line if it's available in the artwork, and just make sure that those look pretty even. This is where you're leveling it. Now, when you are in the crop tool of Photoshop, you want to make sure that delete cropped pixels is unchecked. If I were to check this now and hit OK, this image around here would be gone forever. And if I wanted to make adjustments later, I wouldn't want this detail around here to be lost forever. So if you keep it unchecked, that will come back as long as you save it as a Photoshop file, which we'll talk about in a second. When you are happy with your crop, and in this case I chose original ratio, but I could try some of the other proportions. So if I choose 8:10, you'll see that gets a little bit wider. 2:3 is going to get even more narrow. Whichever one here, just stay within your standard sizes. And I would even encourage you to be a little more limited and just do 4:6 and 8:10. Those are your two standard digital image sizes. And then when you like it, you're just going to hit OK. And now we are all set. So we have done our spot removal, our white balance, our exposure, and our crop. So two things. When we go to save this, we want to save it as a very high resolution image that we can edit later. So I'm going to go up here to File, Save As. And it's going to default to a Photoshop format. And we want that because that's going to maintain our layers. It's going to maintain those deleted pixels from the cropped or undeleted pixels. They're just hidden for now. And I'm going to put them in my final images folder because now it's finished. And I'm going to call this my last name, my first name, and then the title of the piece. Actually, this isn't mine, is it? It's Miles's. And then I like to create another just information for myself, and I say with layers. And I know now that that is the Photoshop file that is at the highest resolution and everything. So I'm going to hit save. Now I also want an image that is a little bit smaller that I can upload to Weebly that is more versatile. So we talked about file types, and this is the time where now we want to save it as a JPEG because that is going to be the most flexible file type online. So I need to make sure that the sizing for it is good. And remember here from the lecture that a good standard size for saving on the web is 1200 on the short side or the long side, just depends on what you know that application is going to be. I clicked fast away, but the resolution here, because it's just meant for screen, is 72. Now this is the image at full 100% size, and I think that that's going to be pretty good for my portfolio, for my website. So now I'm going to file save as again, and this time I want to change that format to JPEG. And the nice thing here is it went ahead and saved my convention from before, except I'm going to take away with layers and call it for web. All right, so now I have a Photoshop file that I can re-edit later that's high resolution, and then I have a smaller compressed file as a JPEG that I can easily email or upload to my portfolio site. Okay, so that's it for photo documentation. If your house and your bedroom is a total wreck after, that means you're doing it right. So keep going. Good luck. Have fun.